At 9:47 on a warm Saturday night, laughter echoed through one of the busiest blocks in Las Vegas. Music poured from rooftop bars. Luxury cars rolled slowly through the crowded street. Tourists held up their phones, chasing memories they would post before sunrise. It looked like every other weekend, until a black SUV stopped at a red light. No one inside expected the next 30 seconds to become the story everyone on that street would remember. Especially not the man who called himself King Rico. Around the neighborhood, everyone knew the name. Not because he was famous, because people had learned not to question him. Rico wasn't the biggest man in the city. He wasn't even the strongest. But he had built something more dangerous than muscles. He had built a reputation. The kind that made people step aside before he even asked. The kind that convinced young men that fear was the same thing as respect. That night, 6 of his closest friends walked behind him, laughing loudly, taking over the sidewalk, shouting at strangers. Everywhere they went, people quietly moved out of their way. To Rico, that felt like power. What he didn't realize was that real power rarely needs an audience. About 50 yards away, another man stepped out of a small steakhouse. No security, no bodyguards, no expensive suit, just dark jeans, a plain black jacket, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Mike Tyson had spent the evening having dinner with an old friend. The restaurant owner insisted he leave through the back entrance to avoid attention. Mike smiled and thanked him, but instead, he chose the front door. He enjoyed walking. It reminded him that life still existed outside cameras and interviews. He wasn't looking for attention. In fact, he spent most evenings trying to avoid it. As he crossed toward the parking lot, he noticed people whispering. A young couple smiled. One man looked twice. Another nudged his friend. Is that? Nah. Couldn't be. Mike heard it all. He always did. Sometimes people recognized him. Sometimes they didn't. Either way, he kept walking. Across the street, Rico spotted him. The baseball cap, the slow walk, the gray beard, the calm expression. He laughed. Look at this old dude. One of his friends glanced over. Who? The guy in black. He walks like he owns the place. Another laughed. Probably some retired businessman. Rico smirked. Let's have some fun. One of the younger guys hesitated. For what? Because I can. That answer told Mike everything he needed to know. Not because he heard it. Because he'd met people like Rico before. People who mistook intimidation for confidence. People who confused silence with weakness. He kept walking. There was no reason to stop. Not yet. Rico stepped directly into Mike's path. The sidewalk suddenly narrowed. Mike stopped. Looked at him calmly. No fear. No annoyance. Just curiosity. You all right? Rico smiled. You got somewhere important to be? Mike nodded toward the open sidewalk. I was heading home. Rico looked around at his friends. You hear that? He was heading home. The group laughed. Mike waited. Years ago, he might have answered differently. Years ago, he would have seen disrespect as a challenge. Not anymore. Age changes people. Experience changes them even more. He simply said, mind if I get by? Rico stepped closer instead. You got any idea who you're talking to? Mike smiled slightly. No. And honestly, I don't think it matters. The laughter disappeared. Not because the words were aggressive. Because they were honest. Rico wasn't used to honesty. He was used to fear. Those weren't the same thing. You think you're funny? Mike shook his head. No. I think you're standing in the middle of a sidewalk. One of Rico's friends covered his mouth to hide a grin. Rico noticed. His face tightened. Embarrassment. The one emotion people like him hated most. He took another step. Now only inches separated them. You scared? Mike looked at him for a second. Then answered quietly. I've been scared many times. The answer confused everyone, including Rico. What? Mike nodded. Fear isn't unusual. Everyone feels it. But I learned a long time ago, you don't need to prove you're brave to strangers. The group exchanged looks. This wasn't going how they expected. Usually people argued. Usually, people apologized. Usually, people backed away. This man did neither. One of Rico's younger friends leaned closer. Yo, I think I know this guy. Rico ignored him. You got advice for me now? Mike chuckled softly. No, just a suggestion. Go enjoy your night. You're too young to waste it trying to impress people who won't even remember this tomorrow. That sentence landed harder than any insult. Because everyone standing there knew it was true. Half the guys behind Rico barely knew him. They followed him because it was exciting, not because they respected him. A middle-aged valet standing nearby finally recognized Mike. His eyes widened. He whispered to another employee, "Oh my God, that's Mike Tyson." The second valet looked over. No way. Seriously? Within seconds, 2 tourists turned. Then 3 more. Phones stayed in pockets. Nobody wanted to interrupt. But whispers spread quickly. Rico noticed people staring. He assumed they were watching him. They know who I am. Mike looked around. Then back at Rico. No. They know who I am. Silence. Rico frowned. What? Mike slowly removed his cap. Nothing dramatic. Just enough. The tattoo. The face. The unmistakable eyes. One of the younger guys gasped. Dude. Oh, no. Another step backward immediately. Rico. That's Mike Tyson. Nobody laughed anymore. Not one person. Rico stared. His confidence disappeared so quickly it almost looked painful. For the first time all night, he saw the man standing in front of him, not an old guy, not an easy target. Mike Tyson, the boxer he'd watched on television as a kid. The man whose highlights he'd shown his younger brother. The same man he had mocked, without recognizing him. You're really Mike Tyson? Mike nodded once. Yeah. Rico swallowed. His mouth suddenly felt dry. His friends had already taken several steps back. Not because they expected violence. Because reality had finally caught up with them. Mike looked around, then quietly said something nobody expected. If you only respect people after you know their name, you've got a bigger problem than tonight. Nobody answered. The street had become completely silent. Even traffic seemed quieter. Rico lowered his eyes. I'm sorry. Mike smiled. I believe you. Then he placed a hand gently on Rico's shoulder. Not to intimidate him. Not to threaten him. Just to make sure he listened. Remember something. The strongest men I've ever met never had to convince anyone they were strong. Mike put his cap back on, walked around the group, and continued toward the parking lot. No celebration. No fight. No punches. Only silence. Behind him, Rico stood frozen, watching one of the toughest men in history walk away, without needing to prove a single thing. Years later, people who were there would tell the story differently. Some remembered the confrontation. Some remembered the apology. But almost everyone remembered one moment. The moment the laughter stopped. Not because Mike Tyson threw a punch. Because he never had to.